Thank you so much, John. You covered a huge amount in that, and there's really quite a compelling picture, isn't there, now of the case to be made for nature-based solutions, both on the job side and the environmental side, and you're perhaps less covered in this debate about the well-being side as well. I'm going to open for questions now. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, and I'm going to invite people to type their questions into the chat bar. While people are gathering their thoughts and doing that, I have a bit of a question, because presenting it as you both have done does really make you feel that we've got such a compelling case here. Why do you think we have struggled to make this case more strongly before the COVID pandemic? And how do you think the COVID situation helps or hinders us with making the case for nature-based solutions? I'm going to go to Brendan first and then come to John. You might need to turn your sound on, Brendan.
Good pardon. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Bill.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So it's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things there. I think actually when we're talking about nature-based solutions, we're talking about things that essentially people have been talking about for a long time, whether it's ecosystem services or another kind of framing. I think nature-based solutions is just really brilliant framing. People get it, and that's very helpful. I think we've moved into a place generally in which the government seems to be a bit more willing to invest, shall we say, in infrastructure, and this should be considered as an infrastructure. The public, and that's partially been driven by public awareness of environmental crises, and that obviously is game changing. And then sadly during the pandemic, because people have been locked indoors, they've really come to appreciate the outdoors. And so if you put all those things together, we're in a much more positive space for these kind of actions and just for conservation more generally. But I think, sorry, Katie, just one more thing actually coming off the back of that. I think, so as much as the pandemic has been really brilliant, I think we all need to be very aware that we are also going to be moving into a very difficult time financially. So yeah, it's not all so kind of positive, it's fair to say.
Yes, it's a challenging time, isn't it? Because I think it does feel like the case has finally aligned, and people have understood the opportunity. But at a time when there is going to be fewer resources around than ever before. Yeah, really good point. John, I'm going to come to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Katie Jo. Yeah, I agree with Brendan really. So I think it's probably something that's been coming for a while, and we have been considering the various elements of nature-based solutions and green recovery. What we've not maybe done to this point is packaged it all as well as we could have, and nature-based solutions, yeah, it gives us a great kind of link between the various areas of work we've been concentrating on, and that the pandemic's just crystallized everything and put a real focus on the fact that we need change, and that people are keen for change.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a note to say tune in at 1:30 for the launch of the National Peatland Action Programme, because that is a really exciting announcement, we hope, and there's been a lot of work on this. I wonder, what's your hope for the Peatland Action Programme? I'll come to John first, and then Brendan.
And so I think some of the things that both myself and Brendan touched on really, that there needs to be a real urgency and a real strategy for addressing our peatlands. I think we both pointed out in our presentations, we can't achieve our climate ambitions without restoring our peatlands. There's been a focus on tree planting, but without peatland restoration, we completely undermine any action there. So I think, I'd like to see some direction for Welsh Government, but funding is critical, and funding as soon as possible, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's two things. There's stopping the damaging activity, and that requires the right regulation or the right enforcement of regulation, and then there's paying for the positive activity. And as with most of this stuff, apart from in the urban realm generally, which is quite interesting, we've got to get private landowners to do things they haven't been doing before. So it's that's a decade-old struggle that isn't suddenly going to change overnight. So what is the incentive program that's needed to get private landowners to restore these areas of land in most cases? And yeah, it's good. It's going to be a mix of carrot and stick.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's a good link because our session at 10 o'clock is with the Nature Friendly Farming Network, looking at the role of agriculture in tackling climate change and their contribution to it. I've got a question here about I think it's really about the map you showed, John, about the higher risk tree planting areas. It does seem to cover quite a large area of Wales. What can you say a bit more about what the risks are that you've factored in as higher risks, and whether those areas in reality there will be lots of places within them where people could still plant trees?
Yeah, absolutely. So the real risk in those areas is the potential carbon stores there, and some of the difficulty in producing the map is the available data. So there's potentially more detailed data out there that might refine some of those areas down. So I agree, it does cover a huge area of Wales, but there may well be areas within there that are slightly lower risk. But we just need the data. We need the evidence to suggest that that's the case. What we did take out in the map was the deep peat areas are not included, so that those blue areas are not deep peat sites. They're kind of shallower peaty, shallower organic soils, and yeah, there may well be areas within there that were less of a risk, but we just need the evidence and data to show that.
Brilliant, thank you. Do you want to come in on that, Brendan?
Yeah, thanks. I think it feeds into the point I was trying to make around environmental assessments. You often are going to need to make a site-based assessment of whether it's appropriate to carry out a certain intervention, and I'm not sure that the environmental assessment framework at the moment operates at a kind of granular enough scale to ensure that happens.
Yeah, there's a real challenge about sort of producing maps that give us the scale of the opportunity, but translating that into actual choices on the ground still needs a good ecological understanding of what's going on in that individual place.
And yeah. I think that goes back to that with the Peatland Restoration Programme, that needs to be part of it. We need that data to be included as part of the programme, and that evidence, and Brendan touched on the precautionary approach earlier. We, with the state of the climate crisis and the scale of challenge we face, we've got to be taking a precautionary approach to these carbon-rich soils.
Brilliant. I've got a question here from a colleague saying most cost-prohibitive factors are due to government policy encouraging business and driving the wrong behaviour, and they said, for example, like using concrete, and therefore subsidising the wrong things, the wrong behaviours. What do you think would be the most important subsidy the government could implement to drive private business to adopt this approach more readily? Shall we go to Brendan first?
Oh God, this is a difficult one. Around concrete specifically, I think this is really fascinating. I have to choose my words very carefully because I know how controversial this is. But concrete is a massive source of emissions and pollution, and one of the most sustainable way of kind of replacing concrete is timber. But the kind of timber that you need to replace concrete is the kind that comes from the kind of trees that people don't tend to like being planted in the UK. So, how do you deal with that? And should you be giving subsidies for that kind of forestry that you might typically be reserving for other kinds of nature-based solutions that everyone kind of agrees with? Discuss. And if you don't provide enough subsidies for it because people take a very purist approach to it, do you end up in a situation where we still depend on concrete, and you end up with a much worse kind of environmental outcome overall? And so I personally think you do need to have some quite kind of dispassionate conversations about commercial forestry and what kind of sustainable commercial forestry looks like. and the role that should play in these kind of industries and in the landscape more generally. But that's very specific to concrete and that example. I think more generally, one of the big challenges for policymakers is enabling private funding that's to do with offsetting to be channeled into the same landscapes that public money is being channeled into, and so private landowners can get both of those income streams. But that's really complicated and quite difficult to do, and I don't think that any of the, as far as I can see, any of the policies being developed around the UK really have kind of got to grips with that, and it's a big challenge. So the government, I'm not sure if this is entirely answering the question. It's not necessarily a case of them incentivising the kind of business community, but I think there are things that the governments could do to get private sector companies who want to either invest as a kind of in corporate kind of social responsibility action or via offsetting into these schemes. So you've got, you're pump priming them and you've got double the money flowing into them. And that's a real challenge.
Yeah, really interesting. And the arts sector has been very good at doing those kind of social impact bonds, which are kind of effectively joint enterprises between government and the private sector that we may need to look at and more in the environment sector. John, I'm going to ask you a fairly quick answer because we've got a couple more we might try and get through. Can you come in, John?
Hi, sorry, Katie Jo, I missed. You broke up slightly there.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying the question was around what kind of interventions or do we think that public policy could drive the right behaviours in business to invest in this approach? Which are the most important subsidies or frameworks that would drive private sector to invest in nature-based solutions?
So it's slightly outside my area of expertise, but initial thoughts would be that we need probably, Katie, I'm struggling a bit with the question. It's something I'm not 100%.
The next question actually links to this because it's actually about the role of the agricultural sector, which is the opportunity through changing agricultural support as we leave the EU and the Common Agricultural Policy, and whether we can replace that with a sustainable land management scheme that will achieve nature-based solutions on farms, and whether we think the Welsh Government is moving in that direction sufficiently. Do you want to take that one, John?
Yeah. So we've seen in the kind of the various consultations we've had over the last year or two that Welsh Government are setting a direction towards a system based around delivery of public goods, and that's something we definitely support. RSPB has been carrying out or looking at the potential for building nature-based solutions and public goods delivery into agricultural subsidies and support post-Brexit. We've got a project in the Gwent Levels where we're working with a number of farmers there to kind of explore what delivering nature-based solutions might look like on farms and what that means in terms of the farm business. There's still a bit of a way to go with some of that. We're getting there, but I think there's still a bit more. We still need to do some more of the financial analysis of what that means in terms of the farm businesses. But yeah, I think the direction we're seeing from Welsh Government is encouraging, and really it's the only way we're going to achieve our kind of biodiversity and climate ambitions is if with agriculture covering such a significant area in Wales. If agriculture is not on board, then we will really struggle to achieve our ambitions, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. And I'm afraid we've run out of time. The questions were coming in thick and fast at the end. There's quite a few questions around the forestry debate, which we're discussing later on this morning, and quite a few that also link to agriculture, which is our next session. So do stay tuned at 10 o'clock for that. There's also been lots of people saying big thank yous for really interesting presentations, and people asking for copies of the reports that you've referenced as well. So I think we will be able to post all of those on the WOVA WBP site. And a huge thank you to John and Brendan, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to take a break now. We'll see you at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.